And a little bit about me, if you guys haven't done a class with me, I've been in the industry about 22 years, and love shooting, and coming to Olympus in 2015, back to 4/3 because I'd been there before. What I love is the size of these cameras, not as much for me for the weight, but more they're like toys, and the computational photography that has just kind of gone forward throughout the last 6 or 7 years. The viewfinder is getting better. The whole mirrorless thing just getting better and better. The accuracy of the focus, the speed, has just, these cameras go with me everywhere, and that's what I love about them. So it's made me shoot more, and your photography obviously gets better when you shoot more. And I always have a camera on me, and that's what I love about the cameras, and I love sharing that with everybody. So at OM Digital Solutions, I'm a key account manager. I'm also a master trainer, and yeah, so I enjoy presenting for you. So here we go. Let's talk about some birds. So today we're going to go through some OM systems / Olympus advantages. We're going to go through a little bit of a gear overview, what you might need throughout the lineup, and some tips, 15 birding tips for you guys. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of this presentation. And then I'll go through some settings to get you started. Some of the settings are Olympus settings, and some are probably more general. So if you don't have an Olympus camera, those will work for you as well. So I like to remind everybody to print, and don't be afraid to print big. Marketing is always king, not just in our industry, but everywhere, whether you're buying a car or whether you're buying a dishwasher. And in our industry, we've gone from low light capability to megapixels, if you've noticed. So it's always the marketing and how it gets shifted. It's easy to see, but we all sort of don't see it because we're getting marketed. And I can tell you that that image there is from an EM1 Mark II, and it's like, I think it's a 40 by 60 of an eagle head. So don't be afraid to print big and show off your stuff, not just putting it online, but actually hanging it, in your house, in a friend's house, somewhere else, selling it, doing whatever. There is nothing like, and quote me on this, there's nothing like holding an actual print or a medal or a canvas of your picture. There's just something about that. It's like a final and an accomplishment for yourself. So definitely do that if you haven't yet, or make a book. So many places to do that now. So let's look at what our advantages are, some of our advantages. And the biggest one is compact and powerful. And we talk about mirrorless being small, but really 4/3 is going to be your smallest in the mirrorless system all around. And all the camera systems are getting smaller, right? Your bodies are smaller with mirrorless. But if you look at an example here, this is an example of a DSLR next to my 300 millimeter f4 and the EM1X. So you can see the size difference there. And also on the side of Kevin there on the right, he also has another camera with a 40 to 150 and a 1.4 converter. So, there's a lot you can carry around. The stabilization helps a lot, but also you have these telemacro capabilities. And you might not think about it when you're looking at the system, but that lens, that 300 f4, will get you a 4-foot telemacro. So if a bird was to land behind these guys on that deck, Kevin can shoot it. The other gentleman has to be 15 feet away. So there's a lot of great advantages to the system when it comes to things like birding. The weather resistance is second to none. The EM1X and the EM13 are IPX1 rated. The new OM1 is actually IP53 rated. So the 3 is the water resistance. It's pretty cool. I mean, and it works really well. And this is a shot of me at Daytona when the EM1X came out. Storm came through and it was cold. Even in Daytona, it was January. Storm came through and I was shooting with a coworker of mine. I said, let's keep shooting. So we kept shooting about 40 minutes in the rain, and it's fun shooting in the rain and the snow and the weather and not having to worry about your camera. And I know it's not birds, but I did get pictures that day to give you an example of what you can get. This is one of the shots I got, and this is one of the shots I got. So it's super fun shooting in the rain and just having a good time, except that it was cold. Another advantage is the supersonic wave filter. We're out in the field doing this stuff. So, you're worried about changing lenses. A lot of us have a couple of bodies and we have 2 different lenses on, and we're trying to switch lenses and we're worried about it. And, you're always careful. You flip the body facing down, you're going to change your lens in a dusty environment. But the Olympus cameras really have this great supersonic wave filter. You turn the camera on and it shakes about 30,000 times and knocks the dust off the sensor. And this came out 20 years ago on the E1. And we've actually updated it to make it 10% better on the EM5 III, where we put a coating now on the sensor so the dirt doesn't really stick. So it's a really, really neat little system. Again, it activates when you turn the camera on, and you can see that example there in the video. It's pretty cool. And that's our dust reduction system. So it really, really does work well. Unless you get something that's really stubborn on the sensor, you rarely have to clean your sensors. Of course, the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, 5-axis on the Olympus. It's always been the best in the industry. We're up to 7 stops now, 8 stops with certain lenses like the 12 to 100 and the 300 millimeter, because they have the image stabilizer in the lens as well, and it works in conjunction with that sensor. This is just amazing, and one of the reasons it's the best in the industry, even though you have 7 stops on some other cameras or 6 stops or what have you, having that smaller sensor, again, you have that smaller mechanism, and so you can move a little bit more within that body. It does a great job. It's even for someone like me that drinks a lot of coffee, I'm able to still hold it fairly steady. But the stabilizer is just amazing. It really is. It just allows you more freedom when you're out in the field. Let's talk about some cameras. So cameras, when it comes to birding, really the best camera is the one that you have with you, right? And it's the one that inspires you to keep taking images. That's what I love about these cameras, because they're fun to me, and they feel good in my hand. The ergonomics are good, and that may not work for you. So that's why we have, a store like Kenmore where you can go in and actually you can feel these cameras, and figure out if that's what works for you. The best camera is the one that you're going to want to take with you. I mean, that's the truth, and they're all good right now. But for what we offer, these are the 4 cameras that I recommend in the current lineup. An EM1 II would also be a camera in here, but these are the current ones. Really bird photography requires that fast, accurate autofocus. You want something that can withstand the elements. And so my new OM1 is going to be, my best now, because obviously it's the newest, right? So newer focusing system. The EM1X and the EM1 III are fantastic for birding. I have an EM1X myself. The EM5 Mark III is like the epitome of 4/3, right? This is a camera that's small, great for travel, and then great for coming home and going birding. You lose some of the frames per second and things of that nature, but you have the guts of my EM1 Mark II, and so it's really a capable camera that's compact. So if you're looking for a super compact, you have that. Whereas the other cameras are in my Pro line. The EM1 series is my Pro line, and the OM1 is my flagship now. And those cameras allow you to have, whether it's battery grips minus the EM1X that has one built in, or whether it's, because you can have 2 batteries now, or whether it's having all that speed, having the magnesium alloy body, superior weather sealing, and all that fun stuff. So those are where you're going to go to that pro sort of category, and they're going to really, capture it for you. So lenses I recommend in my lineup are going to be my zooms, right? So starting out with the 75 to 300. So that's a great little lightweight lens. Again, really, really fits well with the EM5 series. Works great on the other ones as well, but nice and lightweight. Not super expensive. It's a little bit slow. You're a 4.8 to 6.7, so a little bit slower. But in the right light, if you're someone that goes out and they capture birds during the day, and you're just kind of, you're walking around in the afternoon, shooting off a couple of birds, doing some backyard birding, whatever, that's a great lens. Traveling, great little lens. It's not weather resistant, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, the 40 to 150 is a fantastic lens, and that's one of my best lenses. I mean, it's a pro lens, got all the pro coatings. What I like about it is that it's so versatile. I use that lens for anything from portraits to sports to landscape, to birding. And with birding, you may think, well, 150. So, in 4/3, that's like having a 300 millimeter reach, for if you're comparing to 35 millimeter, right? If your equivalents, your 300 millimeters field of view. But if you add the 2x teleconverter to that lens, because that lens will take the teleconverter. Actually, all these lenses on this page, except for the 75 to 300, will take those teleconverters. If you put the teleconverter on, you're at an equivalent of 80 to 300. So 160 to 600, 5.6, all the way through. And it's all internal zoom. So it's small, lightweight, 160 to 600. That's a really nice range to get out there and shoot. And to be honest, with the 2x converter, that's really the only lens personally that I use it on. I've put it on the 300, but I usually use the 1.4 on the 300. So 300 is my favorite lens. It's my f4. It's a fixed focal length. It's a prime. It's super sharp. One of the sharpest lenses we've made. I love this lens. It has stabilizer built into it. You can use the converters on it. Again, I use the 1.4 a lot, which gives me an 840 equivalent at f8 or f5.6. I'm sorry. So it's a nice little range. And the birds that I shoot are pretty far away, so I don't really need the zoom as much. Though zoom is super convenient. So 100 to 400, another great lens. This lens is considered, not a pro lens, so a consumer lens. I look at it as more, we always had like a premium line, and I consider it a premium lens because it has a lot of the features of the pro lenses, like the zero coatings, and it has that robust build, and it's weather resistant. It's just a great little lens. As a matter of fact, I haven't shot this lens yet with the new OM1, and I'm going to take it out after this call because I promised a customer that I would check it out because he shoots that lens and he wants to know how it performs, and I think it's going to perform great. So I'll report back to you guys on that. But that's a fantastic lens. Again, your f5 to 6.3, it will use the teleconverters. You do need some light with it, but man, it feels good. It's robust, great little lens. 150 to 400, if you're a birder and an Olympus shooter, it's the holy grail, right? It's an expensive lens, $74.99. But if you know what the lens can do and you know the technology that's in it, it's got the built-in 1.25 converter, you know that it's a fantastic lens, and it really is. It's a great lens. It'll give you an equivalent of 1,000 millimeters handheld at 5.6. So it's fun. It's a fun little lens. So let's go through some photography tips. Matter of fact, there's the 150 to 400 right there. All right. So tip number one might sound pretty basic, but learn as much as you can about birds. And this is something I need to do as well. A lot of these tips I've taken from whether it's, me shooting or some of the guys that work with us or other shooters. I've kind of combined a lot of these, and a lot of these tips I can use as well. And you want to learn about the birds. You want to learn about their habits. You want to learn about their migration. And so you can find them. And learn where you can find them. Sometimes you can check even with local rescue centers. You can go to your local zoo. That's a great place to just practice and see birds in sort of their habitat, in a sense. Also, there's birds just kind of around when you're in a zoo. So you can just go and kind of pluck off birds all day. It's a great way to practice. Wildlife refuge, they're almost everywhere in the United States. If you're in the United States, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, fws.gov, is a great place to go and gives you some great information on where these refuges are within your state. And they're just great to go to. They're set up for it. Also, the National Audubon Society has some great information on birds in general, and that's audubon.org, and that's a great way to learn as well. This was a shot from Cape Coral, Florida, when COVID first hit. I had an EM1X in my 300 with me, and that's about it. So I was shooting birds the whole time. Start in your backyard. This is in my backyard here from my kitchen window. And sometimes you don't realize what you can get there. So maybe you set up a portable blind to hide. You put up bird feeders and bird friendly bushes. You could set up a little bird studio. I have in my backyard a couple of old branches that I've put rebar in. I drill a hole in the bottom, put some rebar in there, and stick them in the ground so the birds have a place to take off and perch. But it's also a place that I can photograph them, and it looks like they're on like a natural, branch or what have you. So it's nice to set up these little kind of blinds and little bird studios. My blind is my house. I open up my little kitchen window and I fire off some shots from there. So definitely start in your backyard. You can get a lot done. With the Olympus, you have the ability, or the OM system, you have the ability to use the app as a remote. And this is one of the situations where you can set up a camera on a tripod in your yard and maybe have hummingbirds or what have you. And you could be, eating breakfast and firing off shots while your camera's outside and seeing what the camera's capturing. So there's a lot of cool things you can do right in your backyard. Number 3 is to watch the direction of both the sun and the wind. And this is really important because, the same direction, the sun and the wind in the same direction, means it's great conditions for shooting birds in flight. You want to try to keep the sun at your back. That way, your shadow's in front, right? So you know where the bird is, you know where the sun is, and it gives you a way to light that bird up, right? You want to light them eyes up, light them wings up. And birds take off and land into the wind, just like an airplane. So when you go to an airport, you see those flags and the wind blowing the same way the airplanes are taking off and landing, and that's basically the same as a bird. So that way, if you know which way the wind's going, you know which way they're going to take off. And when you photograph birds in flight, try to do it when the sun is low. Birds are more active in the morning and in the afternoon or the evening, and that's when the sun is low, and that's when it helps to light up the underside of their wings. Or in winter months, like now in the Northeast where I'm at, or I'm sort of like middle Northeast in Ohio, you can use the snow as a reflector as well to sort of bring the light back up into the bird's wings. So this shot here was just a couple of weeks ago with the new OM1. This is the 300 millimeter with the MC1414 converter using Pro Capture. So number 4 is to isolate the subject as best you can. This one's tough, because the thing about birds, right, is we want to get closer, and we want these zooms, and we want to get closer. And one of the things that people talk about now with megapixels is, well, gee, if I get a camera that's got 50 megapixels or 100 megapixels, I'll just crop. I'll just shoot my birds with a 50 millimeter and I'll crop. And you could do that sometimes, sure. I mean, that's great, but nothing beats being close. Sometimes you have atmosphere in between you and the bird. I was trying to shoot a snowy owl one time in Michigan, and I was so far away, and there was water coming up behind it, and there was snow on the ground, and I couldn't get it in focus. There was just too much distance between us, that even when I tried to crop, that the bird just wasn't even there. So it really depends on the image, that if you can really do that. You might not have the detail there to do it in the first place. The best thing to do is to put up a blind, or you learn the bird, learn their habits, get as close as you can without affecting the bird. Get a zoom that'll get you there. Even digiscoping sometimes. So but try to isolate your subject the best you can, and choose a clean background. Try not to split the head with a tree trunk. Think about portraiture. I always say that birding, it's almost like portraits. When you take portraits of people, we've kind of got a little bit lax in that in our industry. So and that's probably because of social media and phones, getting better. And so it used to be where you'd look at a bride, let's say, or a senior in high school. You look at their portraits, and if you saw a tree trunk coming out of somebody's head, you kind of noticed that. Nowadays we don't really notice it as much. You see senior portraits taken with a phone, and there's trees behind them. But it's still part of photography. It's still something to look at. And I always look at this like portraiture, where you want to kind of focus on that bird and try not to bring things that'll into the picture that'll take away from the head or what have you. So try to do that as best you can. There's always times you can't do it, when you try to avoid, again, clutter in the image. Sometimes it's hard to do that, so maybe you work with that clutter, and I'll show you that in another slide. Try using a wider aperture, and a longer focal length. So when you use a wider aperture, like for instance, if I use, f4 on my 300 millimeter f4, and then having that 300 millimeter, which gives me a 600 focal equivalents, I'm compressing that background, right? I'm zooming in, so I'm compressing the background, which makes that background, sort of get thrown out more and get blurred out more, which helps with that depth of field. And fill the frame as much as you can, or make a headshot if you can. It's very hard sometimes. I understand that too. These are just tips. Number 5, and I love these birds. This is in Cape Coral, Florida. My sister lives there, and this is a burrowing owl. This is one of the places they are in Florida, and they're just everywhere, people's yards, everything. And the PVC pipe is just, they have a lot of like little crosses that indicate where they are, and that's from where that PVC pipe is. They're pretty neat little birds. This is with the 300 f4 and the EM1X from a car window. So they're right there on the side of the road. You just got to be a certain distance away. Focus on the eyes of the bird and try to get a catch light in the eyes. Again, sounding like a portrait of a person, right? Light the eyes to keep the bird looking alive. You don't want what we would call probably taxidermy, right? And it's the same thing with a person, right? You look at a picture again online, a wedding, a senior portrait, any portrait, and when somebody's using lighting or reflectors or using the sun to light a certain way, you'll see the eyes light up instead of being dark. And when the eyes light up, it really brings that face alive. And it's the same thing with a bird. When you light up them eyes, you kind of look into that soul, right? So try to get them eyes lit up. Again, similar to portrait photography, make them pop. Number 6 is to use the surroundings to frame your subject. So I just said a couple of slides ago to try to avoid clutter. And sometimes it's very tough because we just can't get close. And like this sandhill crane right here, even with the 300 millimeter, he was still, fairly far away. So what I did here was I tried to use some of that clutter in the foreground, get his head into that background where I could throw out the focus a little bit. But in that foreground, I utilized, the rule of thirds. So I used some of those branches as leading lines. And, sometimes you got to try to be creative and utilize some of the rules that we know in photography. And that's like, this would be sort of the rule of thirds, kind of keeping that head off the center over in that top third, and maybe keeping the branches down at the bottom, and sort of working more with composition techniques as opposed to worrying about the clutter as much. And that works sometimes. Not everything works, but it worked here. So think about that when you're out there. Think about your composition techniques. The rule of thirds, if you don't know what that is, this works in pretty much all aspects of photography. And it's basically like what you see here, where you split the image into thirds. So you have these 9 boxes. And basically the idea is that you're kind of keeping your subject away from the center. You're sort of keeping your main points sort of in where the crosses are, where these lines meet, things of that nature. If you were to shoot like a landscape, of maybe a beach, right, you would maybe put the horizon up towards the top third or the bottom third instead of right in the center. And again, there's nothing wrong with centering your subject, but it does get you to think about your composition more, and what you're looking at. So think about that. Don't forget your composition techniques. Number 7 is to learn everything and become comfortable with the camera that you have. And this is super important. We have a tendency to, jump around and jump on all different cameras, and we put our cameras down for a month, and then we pick them up, and if they're mirrorless cameras, they're computers. I mean, they are no longer the cameras of our past. They're computers. And so we have to keep fresh with them, pick them up here and there. Even if you're not shooting, pick it up, shoot some macro in the house, play with your menus. There's nothing like having a camera become an extension of your hand. And when you're out in the field, you don't really have to worry about any issues or problems or things of that nature that, maybe there's a setting on and you forgot, and you got to reset the camera. Now you forgot how to set up all your settings. There's nothing like kind of knowing your equipment enough where it becomes a part of you, because then you really start to focus on what you're shooting and not worrying about the equipment. And that's where the fun comes from, right? So try to learn as much as you can and be as comfortable as you can with the camera you have. It really does make a difference. And birds can be captured with anything from an entry level to a mid-range to a pro camera. The thing is, you're not going to, like, you can have an EM10 in my line, which is one of our entry level cameras. It's contrast autofocus. It's got 121 points though. It's fairly fast. I think it's about 6 frames per second now. That's a fast little camera. You can capture birds with that. It's just not going to be as accurate as my phase detection, or my EM1s or EM5.3. And so you have to know what your accuracy is like. You have to know that camera. You have to anticipate some of the shots, and you have to know, one, the bird, and one, the camera, and just, kind of know how to make it work. So it's not that you can't do it with that camera. It's actually a little harder to do, and you might not get all the shots, but you can do it. So just a matter of knowing that equipment. So anticipate movement. Like I said, set some of your settings ahead of time using maybe the burst modes, the metering. I use spot a lot, or center weighted with birds. Make sure your focus points are set. Your custom functions are set to what you need. Number 8 is for flying birds. Capture the wings in the up or down motion if you can. Try not to get pancakes. That's where they're kind of flat, right? And you have like no dimension to the picture. It's always nice to have them flapping, a little bit up or a little down. Be aware of your shutter speed. If you want to freeze action, you're looking like a minimum of 1,000th of a second. For birds in flight, really looking at about 2,500th of a second to freeze the wings, wingtip to wingtip. And that's a minimum to do that. A lot of birds are super, super fast. Number 9 is when you're capturing groups of birds, capture in odd numbers. Now that's a funny one, right? Because it's like, what if there was 4 birds in this shot? I'd probably get rid of one in Photoshop. No, I wouldn't. The idea is that like I'm shooting sandhill cranes here, right? And I probably have 30 pictures of these cranes going by, and there's probably 50 of them. And so you go through and you edit a little bit, right? You look at your images and you go, okay, this one's got 7, or this one's got 5 or 3. And if you look at those, you'll see where aesthetically it looks a lot better when you have odd numbers. And again, like this image here, they have their, some of the wings are up, some of the wings are down. It sort of makes a triangle, the way that they're flying across the sky. So just, kind of look at the numbers, as silly as it sounds. And again, these are just tips. Number 10 is to not overlap the wings. This one's tough. I have a ton of bird pictures with wings overlapped, and some of them look really cool. So again, just a tip. Sometimes this stuff looks really cool. And there's nothing wrong with backlit subjects, right? I told you to watch the sun and the wind, but there's nothing wrong with a backlit bird, right? Unless you want to send your picture to an editor, they're going to want it lit up. But don't overlap the wings if you can. Try to keep them separate when showing multiple birds. It just separates them a little bit, gives more space to that image. Number 11 is to shoot early in the morning or later in the afternoon. And like I said, and I'm very guilty of going out in the middle of the afternoon. I might be working, take a lunch break, go out and shoot. There's not many birds out. It's really the birds are more active in the morning and in the afternoon. And that's like I said before. And it's, if you think about it, and the light is usually good. This little Canadian goose. This was in the morning light, and it's basically a puddle. It's a pond near me. It's a beaver marsh, and it's like the water was just chocolate, but the golden light there, it just brings in some of that golden color. So whatever the sky is doing is going to reflect in that water, and that's where you want to hit that bird a little bit, and it kind of basks in that sun and that light. And they're more active, like I said. And if you think about it, it's just like any other photography. When you're looking at landscape or even portraits, everybody always says, geez, the morning or later in the afternoon, we got the golden light, you got that nice soft light. I love going in the morning. You have like, just that really soft light, and it's really nice, shooting woodpeckers or whatever. It's always fun. So number 12 is to not make sudden movements. And, birds are very skittish and they scare easily. So maybe stay low to the ground, or, don't make too many fast movements. Stay in one spot for a while, check them out, watch the birds, keep an eye on them, watch what they're doing, wear clothes that are maybe a little bit darker or not as, not as bright, that stand out, just sort of blend, and take your time. And that's number 12. This was a really cool bird that actually was in an area near me that they normally don't come. So really nice with the 300 millimeter and the EM1X. Number 13 is to photograph what you love. And my favorite bird is the green heron, which I have here. And I love those birds. They're like Looney Tunes to me. They just make these crazy faces, not even realizing they're doing it. I feel like they have mohawks, like, in this shot here. But capture subjects that move you, don't worry about what trends are going on or what other photographers are shooting. Learn about the birds you love and focus on the next great and unique shot. I think that's like that with any photography, any photo subject, I should say. Sorry, you guys, too much coffee this morning and my words are getting jumbled. But I think that, when you photograph something you love, whether it's, barns for landscape or old cars or portraits or whatever, I think that it really shines in your photography, especially when we're learning, because you really enjoy it and you're enjoying watching and photographing that specific bird. Sometimes you might run to a local area where people have an eagle they spotted, and there's 50 photographers shooting this poor bird, or an owl or whatever. But maybe you don't. Maybe you step away and go, I'm going to go capture that heron that's down the road. Nobody's over there. Have it all to myself. Just don't worry about what other people are doing. Just focus on your photography and your subject, and you'll get better and you'll learn about it. So number 14 is to be really patient. This was actually a couple months ago in Florida, Ding Darling, in Sanibel Island. Really cool little area where you can actually drive. This was on the drive. You could drive through. Very, very fun. Guy captured a snake here, so kind of cool. but don't get frustrated. Waiting for the right conditions and good subject matter can yield a great capture. And sometimes you're not expecting it, but like these guys here, I got a lot of herons near me in Ohio, and you really got to be patient, but you start to learn how to watch them, when they're going to grab something, and you start to kind of learn, and that's where pro capture comes in, right? And another burrowing owl here. And number 15, my final tip for you guys is not to give up. Don't give up. Practice makes perfect in any type of photography. And the more you shoot, the more you learn about both the subject and your gear, and the better your images are going to grow to be once you do that. And that's the truth. The more you shoot, the better your images are going to be. There's nothing that substitutes practice and playing with your camera. And don't be afraid to mess up, because we have digital cameras. We have memory that's not, I know it seems expensive, but it's really not in the realm of what film was. And so you could shoot hundreds of pictures and go through them and not have any good ones. And that's okay. It's okay to screw up. I've gone out before where I forgot to put a card in and the camera allows me to shoot. And I go to look at my pictures and I spent an hour out there shooting and there's no images. So, but it's okay because I got out and I learned something, so don't get frustrated. Get out there and have fun. So I'm going to go into some birding tips for you guys and some recommended tips as well for the OM and Olympus cameras. So which setting and why? And really this becomes sort of, in my mind, this is more personal preference. I've been shooting more in manual lately, but I also shoot in aperture priority, and it really comes down to what works for you. Aperture priority, you're going to definitely want to play in the realm of, AS and M, I would say. But aperture priority, the subject is fairly still or moving, generally slow, but you can shoot birds in flight as well. A lot of people do. A lot of people use aperture priority all the way around. But this allows a lot of control for your depth of field, right? If you want to open that lens up or you want to close it down a little bit. And you also can easily control that exposure compensation with that front dial. That's a cool thing about aperture priority and also shutter priority, that you can control that compensation right on that front dial. It makes it nice and quick to be able to make it, your exposure darker and lighter when you're trying to adjust for a bird. Like this one here, again, one of those crazy green heron. Now, manual, I've been using that a lot more. I also use auto ISO, which a lot of people don't. Really, and it all becomes, like I said, I can give you tips until I'm blue in the face. And you can read tips online and you can read settings online. But one thing I'll tell you guys is we're all different. Take all of these with a grain of salt, the settings that people give you, including me, and use them to figure out what works best for you. It's always going to be a blend. I've had people email me, I'm trying to, copy Scott Bourne settings, or I'm trying to copy this and it's not working for me. I can't get the bird. Everybody shoots differently. So you take these settings with a grain of salt, you take them as an about, and then you kind of play with them until they work for you. And I find that's the best way to do it, is to blend. Manual is what I've been using lately. And basically that's where obviously you control everything, right? So I'll personally use auto ISO and let the camera go ahead and figure out the ISO. And then I have control over my aperture and my shutter speed. But to be honest, most of the time I'm opening up my aperture. If I'm using an f4 lens, I'm anywhere from f4 to 5.6 usually. That's pretty much where I keep mine for the most part. Now, custom modes are super important. And on the EM1 series, you have like 4 custom modes now. And what they do is they allow you to save your favorite settings. So let's say, for instance, I have, I don't know, a pro capture. It's a great feature, but I have to go into the menu and turn it on. I have to, get it all set up. Maybe I'm shooting a certain way right now in aperture priority. And how do I gotta get into pro capture? I like shooting in shutter priority, that kind of thing. You can set up your camera, for the way you like to use, let's say, pro capture, and you can put it on a custom function so that when you go to say C1, you basically have C1 set up for, let's say, pro capture low, shutter priority, 2500th of a second, 9 points for autofocus and spot metering, let's say. So you basically set up all them functions, put them on a custom function. And then when you go to C1 or C2, wherever they're set for, you have that, birds in flight setting, or you have that pro capture setting. So that's what the custom functions are for, and they work really well. Not mentioned in this presentation, you also have function buttons all over the camera. Even your record button is a function button. those are great as well for setting up, specific functions that maybe are available for function buttons and they're in the menu. And instead of having to go in the menu constantly to find, let's say, ISO, or you're constantly finding that you're changing a certain function on and off, maybe the 2x teleconverter built into the camera. So you put it on a function button so you can press it, turn it on, press it, turn it off. It's just a way to make the camera faster for you. And again, this is just personal preference for you to keep things, sort of going fast. ISO sensitivity. Don't worry about your ISO as much as you maybe did. This shot here, sometimes lower light levels, the morning, afternoon, might require higher ISO. Sunny days, you might be at 200 to 400. You might need to go higher. This is with the EM1X, I believe. This is 6400 ISO. I was on a trip with a bunch of customers, and we went out to a park, and there was nothing going on. And then we find this hawk in the woods in the rain, eating a red squirrel. And this was right after it got finished feeding, and we all watched the whole thing. So the experience was more than the picture is not a great picture, but the experience comes back, and it was really fun to watch this whole scene. And there's more to the story I'm not going to get into, but it was enjoyable because of this. But we all got shots mostly from behind. And then, of course, this shot here, this is 6400 ISO. I was in the woods. It was very dark. It was a dark day. It was raining. It was dreary. It was cold. So, I cleaned it up in Lightroom. You can use Topaz now. And that's what I was going to say, is that the software now is amazing what you can do with higher ISOs and clean them up. Even the new workspace from Olympus 2.0 that you can download now has an AI noise reduction software that works with the EM1, 2, and above, and newer. And it's amazing what you can do to clean this stuff up. It's just getting better and better on the software end. The cameras are getting better as well. And this is the new OM1 at 8000 ISO. So it's amazing what you can do and where we're going. This is 4/3, and this is 25,000. Sorry, this is 12,600. That's 4/3. I wouldn't even dream of going there with birds. So that picture right there, and this one here, was at 4:45 at night, 4:45 p.m. a month ago in Ohio, which means it was getting dark. So I had the camera here set at 12/50th of a second at 5.6, because I had the 300 millimeter with the 1.4 converter, and the camera chose 25,600 on the OM1 to give me that shot. And there's detail in that shot. That's where we're at now with this stuff. So don't worry about your ISOs. Basic settings, exposure compensation, super important. When you're shooting a thing like, or a bird, like an eagle, as an example, it's a great example because birds have different types of color and brightness and contrast. And an eagle's a great example because a bald eagle has this white head, right? And you want to get that exposure right. And so having the ability to, go down a couple of stops or up a couple of stops quickly is the difference between getting that shot correct or not, blowing out the head or making the head correct. So you want to make sure that you have that correct exposure comp. Shutter speed, of course, is super important. And that's why I use auto ISO. Though, if I'm during the day or something like this, and I know that I got some light, I might crank it down to 200 or 400 ISO. But most of the time I just use auto myself. Again, personal preference. But to completely freeze the wings, again, you want a minimum of about 2500 of a second or faster. And 1/1250th to 1/2000th, you can get some motion in there, but you can pretty much, start to freeze them. So it depends on what you want to do. That's really personal preference on if you want movement or not. And here's some recommended settings for you guys. So on an Olympus camera, some of these settings are going to be specific to, and basically for birds in flight, I'm usually in manual, or you can use shutter priority. Some use aperture priority as well. My shutter speed is like I said, 12/50th or faster. I'm usually at 2500th because I want to capture like this shot here where the Harrier was like, basically just frozen. I use a 25-point target on my EM1X, so that I know that I'm capturing that bird. And sequential shooting, I personally use the low mechanical 10 frames a second. A lot of people like to shoot faster. So I just am still at 10 frames. The fastness scares me, the speed. I use continuous autofocus with tracking when they're in the air like that. Otherwise, I use continuous autofocus without tracking. I find it much more accurate on the system. It's just the way it is, and so that's what I use. So whatever works for you. I live near a beaver marsh and a national park over here, and a lot of times there's bushes and trees and other birds, and so continuous autofocus without tracking works well for me as well. Again, ISO auto for me, and I leave the image stabilizer in auto. I let the camera do the heavy lifting there. I find that it does a great job deciding which direction to go based on my direction. So it counters it very, very well. Now, birds in action. So birds that are, kind of moving around a little bit. That's where you might want to use up to 60 frames a second. That's something where you're going to be electronic shutter. Again, whatever setting is good for you, I would probably use manual again. Shutter speed of 1,000th or faster. You want to keep that shutter speed up no matter what. Those birds move, and even with wind, the feathers move. So unless you're looking for motion, I use a single autofocus point a lot. Sometimes I'll use a diamond, the 5, and I'll use silent shooting 18 frames a second. Now, 18 frames a second on the current cameras is electronic, and it's continuous autofocus and auto exposure. If you use 60 frames a second, you're using single autofocus. It focuses once and it's done. So much more accurate with the 18, continuous autofocus, no tracking. And I use the ISO auto. And again, I use the stabilizer in auto. So a lot of the similar same settings. And then Pro Capture, I'll put usually on a custom function. And the way I set up Pro Capture to start, I use it for birds in flight, or sometimes if, like this shot here with this owl where this shrike was coming after it. I got a series of shots of that. And I'll usually set it up at, 1,000th or faster. Usually, again, 2,500 of a second is where I'll start. Again, single focus point for me. It's just the way that I work with that. And then Pro Capture Low, which gives me, again, continuous autofocus and auto exposure on my system. So I'll use that with auto ISO and auto image stabilization. So, very specific and very simple for me. And again, I change this up sometimes. Sometimes I don't like the way it's working, so I'll change it. So to me, nothing is a real absolute for everybody. I think you really got to take stuff like this with a grain of salt and make it work for your style of shooting. So what is Pro Capture I keep talking about? And if you guys aren't familiar, Pro Capture is a feature that's in the EM1 Mark II, the 3, the X, and also the EM5 Mark II. It's fantastic, and it's in the OM1 as well. And we've actually made it the ability of it to go even faster and capture double the frames, so from 35 to 70. But basically, Pro Capture allows you to capture pre-capture images. So if a bird let's say you have a heron, and a heron's going to go down and get a fish. I press the shutter button halfway to focus and meter, and it starts buffering images already. It's not recording them because I haven't pressed it all the way. It's buffering them, and it's buffering up to 35, whatever I set, or 70 in the OM1. And the last one keeps falling off, if you can imagine. Once I press that shutter button, once that bird goes down, gets a fish, comes back up with a fish, I hit the shutter button. Now I'm writing those 35 shots. So I've captured the bird going down, getting the fish, coming up with the fish. It's like you never miss the shot. And it really works. Once you get used to how it works, you start to be able to use it more accurately. This shot here was actually from the OM1, and I was photographing this hawk that you saw earlier, just coming off that branch. It's very accurate, and it works really, really well. So how you set up Pro Capture in the current cameras is really not that hard. You can leave it at the factory settings. I think the factory settings are at like 15 frames a second. And the frame per second on the low, there's low and high. I use low because you're continuously auto focusing in between each shot. It's more accurate. And you can set up anywhere from, like I said, up to 35 frames, and it shows you this image. You can see on the right images there where it shows you the shutter button and how many frames behind it. So this one's set up for 15 pre-capture. And then as you pull down the shutter, it'll capture, up to 25 till the buffer fills on those cameras. So it just allows you to kind of change it up to what works for you. I think I have mine set for like 25 shots. To me, 35 is just so many shots to go through, but I went from 15 to 25 just to give me a little bit more. But the idea is that you have the ability to really change it up for what works for you. So just a few more slides here. Basically, I want to go through some of the focusing techniques here. So you have an autofocus target spot that you can use in the EM1 series. And basically what you can do is you can link your spot metering to your single focus point. So as an example, and that's what I use for when I use spot metering, I'm metering on the bird. And so it works really, really well for that. So again, I use spot metering a lot, and sometimes I'll use center weighted as well. So a lot of people don't know this or don't know how it works, but in continuous autofocus on the EM1 series, um, and this in the EM5 as well, 5.3, there's a sensitivity setting, and this is only for the continuous autofocus, not for tracking. And there's high and there's low. And a lot of people think, oh, if I put it on high, it's going to be more accurate. If I put it on low, it's less accurate. And that's not how it works. Zero is standard. That's how the camera is out of the box. That's what I use most of the time. If you go towards the high, +1 and +2, it's going to tighten up that autofocus so that if a subject is coming towards and away from you and quickly changing direction, if you're photographing something specific and they're coming at you or moving away, like even a squirrel coming at you on a branch and it's moving towards you and away, that's where the +2 will be more accurate on capturing that. The low, -1, -2, is going to improve your performance when you have something like, say, let's say you have ducks and one duck goes in front of the other and you're photographing that one duck and you're trying to focus on it and the other one jumps in front. It's going to be more sticky on the original bird that you're focusing on. So that's where low comes in. Even hockey, a hockey player goes in front of the other one. You want to keep it -2 where it really gets sticky. And that's how you use that. There's also the ability, the EM1 Mark III and the EM1X have a joystick, which is fantastic for moving around your focus points. So does the OM1. The EM5 does not. The EM1 Mark II does not. But you have the ability to use a autofocus targeting pad that you could turn on in your gear settings here on A2. What that does is when you look through the viewfinder and you move your finger on the LCD in the right bottom corner, it takes a little getting used to, but when you do that, it moves around your focus points. So it's almost like a joystick. I think it's a lot faster than using the arrow pad, but it is available. So it's something that you can look for and use for sure. And really quick, I want to go through some of the target settings, what you might want to use them for in the EM1 and the EM5 series. So you have all target, 121 points, crosshair phase detect. It's going to capture anything. This is where I would shoot maybe like birds in flight with a blue sky or even some clouds, not many other birds in the scene. You're going to capture that thing. It's going to be everywhere. Also on the EM1X, with the AI bird detect autofocus, you want to use all 121 points, continuous autofocus plus tracking, and that's going to capture the birds in that. That's the recommended settings for that. Number 9, you do your group target 9 is more like maybe a bird in flight, moving subjects, something with a little more around it. Like me being in like a beaver marsh, I'm going to use something like the 9 point. I prefer the diamond, the 5 points, if I'm not using single point, and that just gives me a little more to grab, the bird while they're moving. Same thing here. And then of course, single point. I use that a lot just because it works for me, but I'm able to focus onto the subject fairly quickly. There's also a small target, and you'd use this to be very, very specific. If you try using this one all the time, you're going to find that your focus is off. But in a situation like this, I actually made this shot black and white because there was so much color, so much going on. It didn't work, but in black and white, it kind of worked. It's a green heron, and it was, looking at a fish and kind of going in between these bushes and branches. And I had the 300, so I was super close. So I had to do almost a telemacro shot of its head. And this allowed me to focus in between the bushes on the eye. So that small target allows you to do that. So that's my birding presentation. I'm gonna go ahead and come out and answer any questions you guys have on the birds. And then anybody that wants to stay on after I answer the questions, I can do a quick presentation of probably in about a half an hour of the new camera, and hopefully maybe quickly answer some questions there. So let me come out of this. And
So we got quite a few questions in the Q&A, but there are a couple that are somewhere in the chat window. If you want to do the Q&A ones first, and then we can, if you want to,
yeah, we can do that. Let me
dig
bring
out
up the Q&A here.
chat ones.
All right.
So, and if you do have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. That makes it much easier for us to find them. Otherwise, they get lost in the chat. So,
all right, I'm going to start out. So Brad asks, Mike, you only use the 1.4 and the 300, not the 2X. Mostly. So I have used the 2X on it and it works really well. The 2X is a great teleconverter that they usually lose a lot of image quality on a 2X, and Olympus did a great job with this one because it's really, really good. The 1.4 is like using nothing. It's amazing. But I actually, the reason I don't use the 2X a lot is because you're at such a reach. You got to remember that when you're utilizing the 4/3 lenses and you have the equivalence, which is, it's an industry standard, right? So the 2 times equivalence to 35 millimeter or full frame. The 300, as an example, gives you a 600 equivalent, right? With a 2X, you have an equivalent of 1200. So when you use a converter, you have to think about equivalence when you think about hand holding the lens. So you're not essentially hand holding a 600, you're hand holding a 1200, and it becomes really difficult. So for me, I can't hold the cameras that well. So for me, I'm shaking. So the 1.4 makes it easier for me to hold it. So I have used a 2X on it. I bring it with me. But for the most part, I like it when it makes, like, say, the 40 to 150, a 150 to 600, or 160 to 600, as opposed to a 1200, even though that's convenient having the 1200. But if you're able to hold it, or you have a monopod, it's fantastic. So just personally, I use the 1.4 more. Let's see, Lisa, when using the 150 to 400 and the 12 to 100 for birds in flight, do you recommend keeping both the lens and body stabilizer on? Yes. Yes, to all those, and the 100 to 400 as well. Yeah, leave those on. The 150 to 400, the 300, and the 12 to 100 have what's called sync image stabilizer. And those work in conjunction with the in-body stabilizer, and they're going to give you the best stabilization. And what they do is, when you zoom out, or when you have a long focal length like a 300, utilizing both works really well. Now the 100 to 400 is a little different. It actually has, I believe it's 2 stops in the lens, and then there's the 5 stops with the stabilizer in the body. And I believe what happens there is it actually cuts the body stabilizer, if I remember right, and goes to the lens when you zoom out, because it's such a long focal length going out to 800 equivalent. That you're better off having that in the lens. So it's a little bit different the way that works. It's a good stabilization, but the sync is just amazing. So that's obviously a tad better, like on the 150 to 400 as an example, or the 300, or the 12 to 100. But definitely leave those both on. And the thing is, if you leave them both on, you'll notice that if you flip off the stabilizer on the lens, it'll shut it off in the camera too. They're connected when they're on there. So all right. So my advice for continuous autofocus sensitivity. So for me, I don't really use it. I leave mine standard. It really depends. Like I said in the presentation, it really depends on sort of your situation and what the birds are doing and how they're acting. So, maybe you have, again, custom modes where you have certain things set up for certain situations. Maybe you have one with a +2, one with a -2, something along those lines. You can easily do that and make it nice and easy to get to it for certain situations. And the 1.5 or 9 focus points, again, that's, like I said at the end there, it's sort of a personal preference. I use single a lot, and I use the diamond, the 5, and then I use all points, or 25 when the birds are in flight. So for me, it really depends on what I'm shooting, but a majority of the time I'm single. I'm a single autofocus point. It's just the way that I shoot. Do I capture videos of birds, which capture audio as well? So that's a great question. I don't. I'm not a video guy. I'm really not. I'm awful with video. I'm learning it now because I have to learn for the new camera and these cameras, and I'm learning more than I ever thought I'd want to about video. But I do want to start shooting it. I'm learning more of the specs, and I need to start shooting it. The more that I see video, and the more I see everybody shooting it, I think it'd be beautiful with some of the birds, especially slow motion and things of that nature. I think I would capture audio as well with it. So I'd probably look at a long microphone to really get out there. And I think I am going to start doing that. So I haven't captured birds in video at all yet, but I think I'm going to start. So that's a great question. Linda, auto ISO, can you set the minimum maximum? Yes, you can. So I usually set the minimum to 200, which is the native of the sensor. And then my maximum I used to set at about 3,200 or 4,000. It just depends on what you want to do. With the new software, I'd probably let it fly to 64. With the OM1, I let it go to 25.6. It's just amazing. So I let that go. It's a native of the sensor. Small target focus is after the single focus. If you turn your dial, you should be able to get to that. It's on the EM5.3 and the EM1.2.3 and X. You should be able to see that. If you don't have an EM1.2.3 or X or a 5.3 or OM1, you're not going to see it. Let's see, Jim, when using the 4/3 system of Olympus, do you multiply the f-stops by 2? Yeah, it's great how we get so confused on equivalence, right? So Jim, I'll answer that. I'll try to be quick with that, but every time that question comes up, it came up last night too, I like to elaborate on the equivalence. I just want to say, one, Olympus didn't create equivalence. It's an industry standard. It's been there since film. Equivalence is just something where 35 millimeter, or what we call full frame now, was always a standard, right? Because most people were shooting 35. It was the most, it was the most used. And so most common. And so everything was always equated to that 35, whether it's medium format and your 80 millimeter is equivalent to a 50, ours, the 25 is equivalent to a 50. Always equated. You're correct. Your aperture. So if you're an f4 lens, like my 300 f4, my equivalent focal length, if I'm standing next to somebody with a 600 millimeter on a full frame, is going to be 600. It's going to be similar, right? The field of view, because I'm cropping, I have a crop sensor. My aperture, that f4, is theoretically going to be like an f8 with the depth of field, right? However, this is where it gets kind of cloudy. On a lens like a 300 millimeter f4, I'm also compressing so much because it's a zoom. So it's going to give you less depth of field look than that 600 f4 from a, say, full frame, but not much because you're compressing. So it's interesting. It gets kind of blended there. Now, portrait wise, if I'm shooting a 1.2 lens or a 2.4 or 2.8, you're going to get more of like a 5.6 look. So that's where you'll see that more. But yes, you can multiply by 2 there. What I don't agree with is some of the words out there where people talk about, or articles where they say the light is different. The light's not different. So my f4 lens is still f4 in my format. You're still getting f4. You're still getting 2.8. You're still getting 1.2. You're not 2.4 in your light. That doesn't make any sense. That means that a medium format camera gives you too much light for the sensor. That means that if I was to stand next to you shooting a model, and I'm at 2.8 on my format, 4/3, the guy next to me shooting full frame and the guy next to him is shooting medium format, we're all going to set our cameras at 2.8 for the lights that are there. So light is always going to be what it is on that format. I don't understand that argument. So I just want to clarify that. If you grab a light meter, there is no button for the format. It's all going to be the same when you're metering the light. So that's the equivalence thing. I know that probably confuses people even more. Sorry. All right. So burrowing owls in Cape Coral. Yes, those were in Cape Coral, Carol. Yes. And hummingbirds in flight, shutter speeds to start with. Linda, I don't know because I haven't shot hummingbirds, but you definitely want to be super fast. Check out some stuff from Steve Ball and some others that have shot them, and check out what their shutter speeds are. A lot of people post that, but I would say guessing, I mean, at least I would say probably what, you guys, 4,000th of a second. I mean, they're super fast. So the bird AI with the EM1X. Okay, Carol, it works pretty well. I put it on a custom function because it doesn't work perfectly. I think it works great. I think it captures really well. But I find that sometimes it misses, or if I'm in bushes or there's other birds, it might grab one that I don't want. So it's not as accurate as it could be, or as I'd like. So I put it on a custom function and I use it for things like birds in flight or, certain situations. Now the OM1 is completely different, and I'll get into that in the next segment, but that one is much more accurate, and there's reasons for it. So, all right, Nancy. Is the image seen through the viewfinder the same as the recorded image, referring to brightness? Yeah, yeah, you're in about, right, because your viewfinder is going to look a little different than your screen at home and what have you. But yeah, you're looking at about what you're going to see. And that's the beauty of mirrorless cameras, is that we're pretty much seeing what our image is going to look like. Now, you have a histogram you could bring up as well by pressing the info button. And when you see the histogram, that's a great thing to go by too, to know if if your mountain on the histogram is in the middle, you're theoretically at the correct exposure, but you might want to be a little darker, a little brighter, depending on your situation or what you want to create. So I always use my histogram as well as, seeing in the viewfinder. If it's not changing for you in the viewfinder, you might have optical viewfinder on, OVF, in your menu, which will allow the viewfinder to stay the same as if you're looking through an optical. All right, Cynthia, availability on the 150 to 400. There is no drop-in teleconverter on it. Oh, drop-in teleconverter. I thought you were going to say drop-in filter. It does have a teleconverter built in. Yes, the 150 to 400 is still the same. It's still back ordered majorly. If you have it on order, just hang in there, because they are coming in monthly and they are going out. They're just going out as much as we can get them out. I mean, you're talking a handful coming into the US every month, or other parts of the country or the world, and then getting dispersed out to the dealers and then out to the customers. It's just it's the one lens I don't want on back order, because it's an important lens for everybody, but it is worth the wait. You will get it. So I appreciate everybody hanging in there. Gino, all the different autofocus groups work in conjunction with bird subject detection and EM1X. No, the EM1X is meant to be used in all 121 points and continuous autofocus tracking. It's very specific, and that's why the OM1 is a little more accurate. You're able to change that on the OM1. I don't use the EE1 finder. I do own one, and I have played with it a little bit, but I don't use it. But it's a great finder. It allows you to basically track as if you have like a rifle, right? And you're shooting a bird, literally shooting. But yeah, it works really well. There are people that use it. I haven't used the EE1, but it does work, and it works on other cameras as well. If you have a Nikon or a Canon or a Sony, as long as it's lined up with the hot shoot of the lens, you can use that on any camera. So that's a great addition to the kit if you're shooting birds out there, for sure. Zebra stripes. So there are blinkies. There is like a little bit of a blinky. It's not really zebra stripes. We do have a highlight and shadow like blinky that you can set up. They drive me nuts, Jim, but we do have those. But the OM1 has zebra stripes in video. The other cameras do not. All right, let's go to the questions in the chat.
Yeah, there was a couple. Cynthia was asking if Olympus has tutorials for setting up the Mark III, Pro Capture, Northern Lights, etc.
Yeah, take a look, Cynthia. Go to our website, go to getolympus.com, and go to, on the top of the links, you'll see next to support on the right, there's one more over, you'll see Learn Center. And if you go to the Learn Center, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's the events we're doing. There's all kinds of free stuff, ambassador articles, blogs, and videos. And we're adding more all the time. And in there, you should be able to find a lot of goodies for setting up cameras, for different types of shooting, all that fun stuff. So definitely go check that out. That's a great way to get going on that, for sure.
Okay, and Cynthia was asking, what is the app for iPhone to use with your Mark II or Mark III?
So we've just updated that. So you're going to look for the, it was the OI share. So look for OI share, but if you don't see that, it might be called OM share now. That might be the new one. I'd have to verify. I think it's in my next presentation. But what we did on the OM share is we combined, we had 3 apps. We had an app for geo targeting, we had our tagging, we had an app for something else, adventure or something. We put them all together into one app called the OM share. So look up OM share, and if you don't see that, look up OI share, and that's the one you want. And that'll work really well.
Thank you.
Sorry, my microphone's making me itch.
And Carol is asking, what's your experience with Bird AI on the EM1X?
Yeah, that was up before. So she had asked that before. I think it works really well. It's not as accurate as the new camera, for sure, but that's, it's a new camera. I mean, they're always going to get tighter and tighter as they go. It's a whole new system. But it's pretty good. I actually use it on, like I said, a custom function, because I don't like using it all the time. There's 2 reasons for that. I don't like having boxes around my birds all the time, or people. Same thing with face detection. I like it sometimes because I like to be in control a little bit. But it works pretty well. There's times that it's not as accurate as I would like, but it works fairly well. So that's why I put it on a custom function. I think it's pretty good
Yeah.
for sure.
And just as a reference for everybody, after we were talking about the hummingbirds, Carol shared that hummingbirds use pro capture and high shutter speed, like 250th. So that's a little tip from
Wow, it's a
Carol.
lot lower than I thought. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
thinking like, 4,000th of a second because they're so fast. I would think that you'd have to really, really slow it down. Of
Yeah.
course, if you use flash and stuff,
Right. Yeah.
that's where you
That
can really take it
changes
down to
everything.
250th and capture them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to let everybody know that we're going to get this on our YouTube channel. It will happen either late today or maybe tomorrow. It does take some time for these to be downloaded and rendered on YouTube and edited a little bit. So you can watch for that. And otherwise, I think that's it. One, Jim just dropped in an answer or a
Oh yeah,
question.
2,500. She said,
Oh,
not
okay.
250. I was
Oh,
like,
okay.
whoa.
There we go.
That's a little better, Carol.
I know. That's why
Thank
I
you.
love these birding classes is everybody's so open to sharing all their information and
Oh yeah, well, that's why I miss coming to the
like
store because I also have
crowdsourcing.
everybody. We all sell each other everything because we're all into it.
Yeah, everybody is
you know,
so
the
open.
customers sell me on stuff as much as I sell them on stuff. You got to buy this new strap. Oh, okay.
Right.
Most current workspace. Yeah. So basically we have 2.0 and it compares to Lightroom. I use Lightroom and I love Lightroom. I don't like to change things. Um, Workspace is okay. I think it's the best software I've used from a manufacturer ever. I think they did a great job with it. And the new version is really cool. And it's got features I'd love to see Lightroom have. It'll actually, the new AI noise reduction is really good. It'll take, if you have a series of photos, like say you go on a trip to shoot airplanes, 1,000 photos. It'll take all those series of photos and combine them into one picture with an arrow. And so you can open them up after. So you don't have to constantly see all them photos. It'll also pick out, if you want, which ones are in focus, the best focus, things of that nature. So really good organizing, really, really good updates, things that I think we're going to see on other software eventually. And it does a great job. I personally like the way Lightroom works better. I think it's more smooth, but that's because I'm used to it. So I think they did a nice job with Workspace when they first started it. And I think the update is really good. So
Yeah.
definitely worth it for free.